Moist doesn't begin to describe Furina. Furina, the wettest Archon of the seven, the one who is hailed as the holder of the WAP, WetAssPlaystyle. Furina is a character that creates a new playstyle for many teams, and even unlocks party healers like Jean and Barbara. She brings two sisters back into the fold of meta characters alongside many others. The goal of Furina is to take massive amounts of damage during her burst, and then have another party member heal it up for a party-wide damage buff. While this won't be that significant in reaction-based teams, with any team that does a lot of personal damage, she will greatly enhance it. Now, let's dive into Furina's WAP. Anything related to Furina in this video is purely hypothetical and for discussion purposes only. Being the Hydro Archon means that she will have constant Hydro application, and this comes in the form of her elemental skill. I don't know exactly how much Hydro she will apply, but she will apply less than Xingqiu and Yilan. That much is certain. The skill application is up in the air for now, but I'll be doing a lot of testing when she releases. Nonetheless, she will most likely have questionable Hydro application in vape teams, but exceptional Hydro application everywhere else. For Hyper Bloom, Freeze, and other variations that don't involve overwhelming Hydro application, she will truly shine. Her skill will summon 3 Ocean Familiars that will attack in certain intervals. Their damage is pretty good, rivaling Yilan, and they have 100% uptime. They will be constantly draining your HP over the skill interval, so it's important to have a healer in any of her teams. This HP drain will help with her burst, but we'll discuss that later. There's a second part to her elemental skill. If you use a charge attack, you can change her alignment. You can change it as often as you like as well. Using it will allow you to heal a character on field. Sadly, this is probably the worst part of her kit. She will heal like Kuki, and the amount of healing is also pretty bad. And unlike Kuki, she won't be attributing any damage while healing, nor will she be gaining energy. So this portion of her kit is essentially
useless.
It's useful for the overworld, but if you ever utilize healing during anything important like the Abyss, you will be sacrificing every part of her kit. I wish this healed team-wide, or at least maybe had like a pulse of Hydro damage when it healed. Unfortunately, it doesn't. So you can pretty much just ignore this for any combat situation. Now, let's talk about her burst. All changes in HP, whether it's from healing or taking damage, will contribute to a team-wide damage buff. Furina herself already brings your entire team down to around 50% health with her skill, so a healer is important to maximize this buff. When this caps off, you can expect about a 75% team-wide damage buff, and that is massive. However, don't expect to hit those numbers unless you not only have a party-wide healer, but a character that self-damages themselves alongside Furina. Neuvillette stands out as someone who can do all of that. It is really good for any team where a lot of damage is coming from the characters, but I've begun to see that this doesn't really help reaction damage at all. So for teams involving only EM scaling characters, this won't affect their damage as much. She will at least still be useful in many teams, but it's a shame that her Hydro application is really questionable, because the teams that get the most benefit from this are vape teams, since they really only care about how hard you hit. With all of that in mind, if you can find a team where she works in, it's pretty awesome actually. She increases the damage of the whole team by a pretty significant margin if you check all of these conditions. 1, you're able to heal your entire party to max. 2, you're able to damage yourself consistently, and 3, you have multiple healing sources that work in tandem with other healers. Now, if you're using a character like Neuvillette, Cyno, or Risley, this is great. But as I mentioned earlier, for teams built purely on EM, her burst just won't benefit them, unfortunately. Any Freeze team will really love her though, but you will have to bring a party-wide healer to utilize her buff. In Freeze teams, you barely take damage, so being able to heal to max will be very important, because once Furina drains you to 50% health, you won't ever get her damage buff again. So if you have 1 or 2 characters that do good damage on their own, They will be great teammates to pair alongside her. But if you use her in a team like maybe Barbara, Kuki, Ether, and a Flex, or a Nilo Bloom team that is using other Dendro options besides Nahida, then her burst is pretty much useless there because all of the characters don't really care about self-damage. With that in mind, you'll normally have at least 2 characters on the team that will benefit from her damage buff, like Nahida and Furina in a team will still really enjoy that buff. Just keep that in mind when you're team building. Her passives are pretty interesting as well. Basically, with her first passive, if you actually overheal, other party members will get that heal instead. This can be pretty useful, and her other passive increases her damage based on how much HP she's built. Nice. For her artifact options, C0 to C5 will want to use the Golden Troop set. This gives her massive skill damage, and that's all that Furina does. This is hands down her best choice if you want to be doing good damage with Furina. This will overshadow any and every other set that may be considered. If you still haven't gotten a good set though, then you can consider using a mix set involving the Golden Troop set, Hydro damage, or HP percent. She can use Tenacity, but Golden Troop is definitely her best option. For C6, you'll probably want to use the Hunter set, as she's able to get that massive crit rate buff. As for the substats, it will vary. The Sands will always be HP percent, while her Circlet will always be crit. Unless you're of course using the Hunter set at C6, then you can consider HP percent, but crit damage will probably still be better in that case. Now, for the Goblets, the safest bet is HP percent. Since you get so much damage percent from her burst, this will even out to be her best option. But in teams where she really can't maximize the buff, hence teams that cannot overheal, Hydro damage may be a better option. This will have to be tested, but the best bet is most likely HP, crit. Furina has quite a few weapon options as well, and this brings up a point, her reliance on energy. She wants to have a good amount of energy recharge or another Hydro unit in the party because she will most likely not be catching any of her particles. You don't want to spend time funneling energy for her burst, and it's a bad option to skip her burst every other rotation. You will probably want to be using an energy recharge sword or an energy recharge sands. With that being said, her signature weapon is actually not looking too good, as it's just a massive stat stick that will let you hit incredibly hard, but it will not help with the uptime of her burst. So if you get it with a C0 Furina, then you may have to run an ER sands anyways, and at that point, it does barely better than the 4-star options. Other than that, she can use any 5-star weapon as long as it doesn't raise attack percent, but many 4-star options are just really nice to use. And by many, I mean one, the OG Dragonspine Sword Festering Desire. It gives ER as a substat, and it gives a ton of elemental skill crit rate and damage. It's as if this sword was made for her. If you have it, this is one of her best 4-star options. There are many other Fontaine weapons introduced that seem to work with her as well, the pipe being one of them, which you can get from fishing. Other options are the BP weapon, that's actually a really good option. Besides that, she can use many other swords. Favonius is a safe bet, as she will be able to help herself and her team with energy, but any weapon that gives crit rate, crit damage, or HP percent is a good option. Stay away from attack scaling weapons because she has 0 attack scaling in her kit. So all in all, Furina will be a decent character, but she has quite a few restrictions. If you can fulfill those restrictions, she will be amazing. If you can't, well, you'll find that she's rather average. Her damage buff doesn't help reactions at all, so that is a downside for teams like Hyperbloom, and her Hydro application is questionable for bait teams. I'm hoping that when she's released, they increase her Hydro application so she works perfectly in any team. That way, her viability skyrockets. For those teams, the best option is to use 2 Hydro units. With that, you won't really have much issues, such as with any Hu Tao team. She enables healers to really unlock a huge portion of damage, which is great. Jean, Noelle, and even Barbara can instantly net you a 50% team-wide damage buff. That's pretty amazing, as long as you have a couple characters that can use it. Even with all of the downsides, she does hit very hard. You see how much damage Yelan does? Well, she can hit similar numbers. Now, let's talk about Furina's cons. Her C1 makes you get an instant 25 to 37% damage buff when she casts her burst, and raises the cap of her elemental burst by the same amount. This really increases her buffing capabilities and allows you to ramp up the damage instantly. This is a great constellation, but her C2 is even better. Her C2 lets you ramp up even faster, and every point over the cap will increase her max HP, so she will be doing insane damage. This is a great stopping point if you want cons for Furina. They're also not entirely necessary. Sure, it's way more damage, but her buff is already good enough on its own. Her C4 lets you get a ton of energy, solving any ER issues that you have with her. And her C6 is pretty spicy. For one normal attack string, she will be able to unload a massive amount of damage, with some other self-damaging effects. She also heals your entire team, which is pretty great. She still can't be an on-fielder, but she will work more as a sub-DPS to dish out a big whiff of damage and dip every rotation. This is pretty good, but it's a C6, so most of us won't really be able to experience it. Now, being the Archon of Hydro, I was hoping for a bit more, to be honest, and I would be 100% satisfied if she worked in bait teams as a solo Hydro unit. I guess we'll have to see on release. Everywhere else though, she's pretty good. You have to pair her with a healer though, and the best ones to utilize her burst are party-wide healers. Bennett as your soul healer will be a poor option unfortunately because he heals one character and only up to 70%. So after the first rotation, her damage buff will fall off a cliff, as it will never reach the same values again. One way to alleviate that is to use the weapon like Prototype Amber, which will heal past the 70% that Bennett heals up to, and you can also use another healer, like Jean. You can even use Jean and Bennett for like a Sunfire setup. Characters like Mona and Nahida can really use the Prototype Amber as well, so just keep that in mind if you swap her in with those teams and don't want another healer on your team. At the end of the day, she will be a great unit as long as you can keep in mind her restrictions and build into them rather than building around them. I am still excited for her release as many team options open up with her. You will really have to think about the best way to utilize her per situation, which can be a fun aspect, as many different teams will have many different effects. Good luck pulling Furina monsters. May you enjoy Furina's WAP. She will really moisten up the enemies and let loose a raging flow of Hydro over them with that WAP. If you're still here, you may as well like the video. It takes about 2 seconds, and it's a win-win for the both of us. If you really enjoyed it, then consider subscribing, as only about 1% of you are actually subscribed to my channel, which is a little bit embarrassing on my part. Enjoy your WAP. Oh wait, what was that? WAP means something else entirely? Oh.